You're standing in the pet aisle of your local supermarket. There's a bag of bird seed sitting on the shelf with this bright red cardinal on the front, a little chickadee on the back, maybe a tiny golden finch in the corner, mid-flight, with its wings catching the light. The bag promises a complete blend for wild birds. Plus, it's $5 cheaper than the one right next to it. So you put it in your cart, you drive home, you fill up the feeder, and you step back feeling pretty good about it. But somewhere between that exact moment and the next morning, something begins to happen that you can't even see. It's not happening in the feeder itself, and it's not in the birds. It's in the ground, right beneath it. See, the birds land, they start picking through the seed, and they end up throwing most of it aside. By the time evening rolls around, a whole layer of discarded grain is coating the soil below the feeder pole. By the following afternoon, out in the heat, it starts to change. And the birds that come back to forage through what fell, the ones eating what's left over, are ingesting something that colorful packaging never mentioned. You didn't know. And honestly, that's the whole point. Most of us just assume that if a product is being sold for wild birds, it's actually been tested for wild birds. We assume that somewhere between the factory and the store shelf, someone asked the basic question, is this stuff actually safe? But here's what most people don't realize. Wild bird feed in most countries sits in this massive regulatory gray zone. It doesn't get the same oversight as regular pet food. It doesn't even require nutritional labeling the way livestock feed does. And the ingredients it can legally contain, we're talking fillers, chemical coatings, agricultural byproducts, would completely fail basic safety checks if they were meant for a dog bowl. And this is where it gets even more complicated. Because it isn't just about what's inside the seed. It's about what that seed becomes after it sits inside a plastic bag, travels in a hot, unrefrigerated truck, rests on a warm shelf, and then spends a week inside a feeder exposed to rain, condensation, and the afternoon sun. That bag on the supermarket shelf? It's just the start of a chemical chain reaction, and the birds in your yard are right at the very end of it. The reason all of this matters isn't just some abstract theory. It's about that specific bird that landed on your fence this morning, looked right at you, and then flew down to the feeder, the one that keeps coming back every single day at the exact same time. See, birds that are slowly getting poisoned by contaminated feed don't just drop dead out of nowhere. They decline, they get sluggish, their feathers start losing their structure, and their eggs become incredibly fragile. Even their fledglings, raised on whatever the parents can find to bring back, start their lives already at a massive disadvantage. And since none of this happens out in the open or dramatically or in a way that points to one clear cause, almost nobody ever connects it back to the feeder. This data has been sitting in ornithological research and wildlife toxicology reports for years, but most backyard birders have never heard a single word of it. By the end of this, you're going to know exactly what to look for, what you need to avoid, and why that cheapest bag on the shelf actually carries the most expensive hidden cost. If you care about the birds in your yard, and if you want to understand the natural world on a level most people never really get to think about subscribing. This channel is entirely about these kinds of deep dives, and there's a lot more coming down the line. Open up a standard bag of grocery store birdseed and just look at what's actually inside. Sure, you'll see some sunflower seeds. A few, they're scattered through a massive pile of smaller, duller grains things, like red millet, white millet, milo, cracked corn, maybe some wheat. Usually, the sunflower seeds sit right at the top, or they're perfectly photographed through that little plastic window on the front of the bag. They're the hero ingredient. They are exactly what that bright red cardinal on the packaging is promising you'll be feeding. But if you look at the actual volume, they might make up less than 15% of the entire bag. The rest of it is just filler. And filler isn't just a casual word here. In the commercial birdseed industry, filler means grains chosen strictly for weight, cheap shelf cost, and visual bulk. It has nothing to do with nutritional value, what birds actually want to eat, or digestive safety. Now, some ground-feeding birds will eat red and white millet, but the amount of it in most commercial mixes is way more than any single species would ever naturally consume. And then there's milo. It's this round, reddish sorghum grain that the vast majority of songbirds completely reject. In fact, in studies on feeder preferences, milo had a consumption rate of pretty much zero across most North American songbirds. So, why is it even in the mix? Because it's cheap, because it fills space. Because the average buyer sees a heavy, full bag and assumes that fullness means value. What it actually means is that the majority of what you just paid for is going to end up kicked onto the ground, and the stuff that ends up on the ground doesn't just sit there harmlessly. Here is what actually happens in the hours after birds visit a feeder stocked with one of those standard grocery store mixes. The seeds they don't want, like the milo, the extra millet, the broken pieces of cracked corn, they just sweep them right onto the ground. Some fall cleanly, but others break apart on impact, releasing this super fine grain dust into the soil right under the feeder. And that grain dust is hygroscopic. It literally pulls moisture straight out of the air. On a warm day, within just 4 to 6 hours, that thin layer of broken grain has absorbed enough humidity to start triggering microbial activity. Now, this isn't some dramatic, highly visible process. There's no smell you'd notice from a distance, and there's no discoloration you'd catch with a casual glance. Everything is happening at a microscopic level, in that warm, compressed seed dust environment right between the surface of the soil and the lowest air currents. But here's the problem. The birds have come to forage on the ground like sparrows, towhees, doves, and juncos don't see a contaminated surface. They just see leftover food. So they eat close to the dirt, breathing in that grain dust with every single movement. And inhaled grain dust functions totally differently in birds than it does in mammals. Their respiratory systems are already extraordinarily sensitive to airborne particles, and they have almost zero ability to filter out fine organic matter the way humans can. What just feels like background dust to you is actually an active respiratory irritant to a house sparrow. And that is before we even talk about what that dust is actually carrying. Which brings us to Section 3, why birds toss the seed they hate. If you watch a bird at a standard feeder for just 2 minutes, you'll see it. A chickadee lands, picks up one seed, drops it, picks up another, and flies off. 30 seconds later, same thing. Within an hour of a busy morning, the platform feeder is half empty, but the ground underneath is completely covered. This isn't just them being wasteful, it's a selection. And what it really tells you is that a bird's sensory system is doing a job the packaging never did. See, birds evaluate seed by its weight, texture, and how solid the shell is before they ever commit to cracking it open. If a seed is too light for its size, that signals a hollow interior, maybe from bugs, dehydration, or early mold. A shell with microcracks or soft spots means moisture got inside. These birds are running a full quality check in under a second, and they're rejecting more than half of what those cheap mixes contain. But here is the catch. They have to handle each seed to figure this out. They pick it up. They taste the surface of the hull before dropping it, and unfortunately, some of what's on that hull, especially when it comes to corn and peanut-based pieces, is completely invisible to every sense they have. Take aflatoxin, for example. It's a toxic byproduct of a mold called Aspergillus flavus, and it has absolutely no odor that birds can detect, no visible color when it's early in the contamination stage, no taste signature that would make them spit it out. The seed passes the bird's quick filter, and the toxin goes right in with it. Let's look at the ground right beneath your feeder. Think about what happens 24 hours after you fill it up. The morning dew has already soaked the grain dust twice. The sun beats down, and the temperature on the ground climbs past 80 degrees. And those little fragments of cracked corn, they have a ton of surface area and are packed with sugar, making them the absolute perfect breeding ground for mold. You can't see any of this happening with the naked eye. If you took a picture of the ground, it would just look like regular old dirt and seed husks. But under a microscope, the surface of those tiny corn fragments is already covered in fungal mycelium, which is basically that invisible root-like web of mold that spreads long before you ever see actual fuzzy spots. One type in particular, Aspergillus flavus, absolutely thrives on corn and peanuts when it gets warm and humid. And here's the scary part. It can start churning out aflatoxin within just 48 to 72 hours if the moisture and heat line up. Aflatoxin is literally one of the most powerful, naturally occurring liver carcinogens on the planet. So when a bird is foraging on the ground, it isn't picking up obviously moldy seed. It's eating it right at that hidden stage after the toxin is already there, but before it smells or looks bad enough to trigger any warning signs. The feeder looks fine, the ground looks normal, the bird eats, and the poison just starts building up inside its system. Aflatoxin doesn't usually kill them overnight. It can in massive doses, but with the low repeated exposures they get from backyard feeders, it plays a much longer, crueler game. And the first thing it goes after is the liver. Now in birds, the liver isn't just there to filter out bad stuff. It runs practically everything. It controls their immune system, how they process fat, the proteins that build their feathers, and even the hormones that tell them when to breed or migrate. So when a bird's liver starts failing, it doesn't just get sick, loses the very things that allow it to survive in the wild. At first, a bird with aflatoxin buildup will look completely fine. It'll still show up at your feeder, it'll still sing, but maybe it's just a split second slower to fly away when startled. Its feathers might start looking a little ragged because the microscopic parts aren't interlocking right anymore. Maybe it lays one less egg this spring, or its chicks hatch a little underweight. None of these things point back to the feeder. There's no obvious cause and effect that you'd ever notice from your window. The bird just seems a little off. And then, one spring, it just doesn't come back. But let's zoom out for a second. Your feeder isn't the only one on the block. There are probably a dozen, maybe 20, within just a half-mile radius. And most people are buying whatever is cheapest at the local store. Every single one of those yards has discarded grain rotting on the ground. Every single one is cycling through the same warm, wet weather that makes fungus explode. And the birds? They don't just stick to your yard. They visit 3 or 4 other feeders a day. They carry spores on their beaks and feet from one yard to the next. They feed their babies regurgitated seeds from multiple different houses. So this contamination isn't trapped in one spot, it's being moved, passed around, and multiplied across the entire local bird population. Meanwhile, under every feeder, the spore count in the dirt just keeps climbing all summer long. It goes dormant in the winter, and then the second spring hits, it wakes right back up in soil that was already preloaded with fungus from the year before. This isn't just a problem with one dirty feeder. It's a massive neighborhood-wide issue that nobody is tracking because nobody even knows it's happening. This is the part where we really need to stop and think about what we're doing. Aflatoxin B1, the exact compound that grows on that corn and those peanuts, is officially classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a Group 1 carcinogen. To put that in perspective, that is the exact same safety category as asbestos and cigarette smoke. It's not something scientists think might cause cancer. It is a proven fact, and testing shows it's routinely found in commercial birdseed mixes, mostly in the corn and cheap fillers, especially if the bags were shipped or stored in hot, stuffy warehouses before they ever made it to the store shelf. We buy it, we open it up, we pour it into an outdoor feeder that sits in the baking heat, and we top it off without ever really scrubbing out the old residue at the bottom. The birds have absolutely no way of knowing, and honestly, until right now, neither did you. So, let's go back to that supermarket aisle. Think about the bag with the pretty cardinal on the front, the one that's $5 cheaper. Think about that good warm feeling you get when you buy it, knowing you're doing something nice for nature. That feeling is real, and your intentions are totally genuine. And that is exactly why this matters so much, because bridging the gap between what we want to do for these animals and what we're actually doing to them isn't about caring more. It's about knowing better. The feeder in your yard can still be the safe haven you want it to be. You just have to know what's actually inside the bag.